Hi, my name is Andrew McLaren, and we're here to talk about NGSS practice number 5, which is all around computational and mathematical thinking. I've come up with a rubric and a pretty nice assessment format that works well within a lab as well as like standalone. So we're going to look at that, and I kind of used ChatGPT to write elements or kind of get inspired for some of the criteria that I was using to brainstorm. So we're going to talk about this in a couple different stages. We're first going to look at earlier attempts thinking about this practice and trying to support students. Then we're going to look at the actual conversation that I had with ChatGPT to create this rubric. So if you want to do something similar or kind of adjust this, then you could do that based off that example. Then I'm going to show you some context in which this rubric might actually be used and the final product of that rubric, and show you an example of this with calculations so you can kind of see how I would structure this and how I think about grading it. Now, I'm not going to go into how to set up Google Classroom with a rubric and whatnot. You can see that in my claim evidence reasoning video and my modeling one, but definitely would be something that I would use with this, with like digital comments. They're just super effective with giving good feedback. For the NGSS practice number 5, you can kind of see this is from Appendix F. It's just the short written description of what it looks like at different grade levels, which I've found very useful in the past when making rubrics. But I really struggled doing this on my own because there's such an overlap with SEP number 4, which is about analyzing data and graphs. And then this is more about mathematical thinking, and there's a lot of similar language used between these two practices in the NGSS. So it can be kind of unclear about like, hey, if I'm teaching this practice, am I focusing on that, or am I focusing on it on this practice, or is it kind of both? And for me, I wanted to make it separate and clear about when I am teaching different things. Um, and I was really struggling. Like this is like one of my earlier attempts. You can kind of see that it even has analyzing data sets in here, and people will talk about you doing that within your mathematical thinking. So it gets really, really confusing, unfortunately. And so if we look at some of these conversations, I'll give you the links to these so you can read line by line all of the information. But basically, I started off like, hey, give me some categories to score by. And I liked a lot of these, and I actually kept a lot of this stuff. Like, I think there's doing the math, there's using tools, and then there's analysis or interpretation, which I kind of disagree with doing the analysis piece here. That's more of that SEP number 4. And it's more about interpreting the data and communicating that data to me. That seemed like more of this mathematical thinking piece. And so I ended up tweaking it a little bit. I'll go down to what we ended up making ultimately so you can kind of see where we're working towards. And then also there needed to be clear documentation of the process. So you may be able to do the math, but I need to be able to see it, right? Um, and so that's similar things. It's like picking the concept is pretty important. Um, and then maybe they needed a little bit of scaffolding versus kind of doing it on their own. So that's a little bit of a different element here for me. Definitely some overlap between those two, but I wanted to create some sort of specific criteria to look through for myself. In any case, if we go back to this conversation, you can kind of see that I didn't like the exact things that it had in here. So I was trying to get some better formatting to look for specifics. Um, and it was really interesting because it was just giving me very broad things like you're just demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of mathematical concepts. And I know my middle school students would push back if I said that they didn't show a sophisticated level and it was like only um, a basic understanding. Like what is a basic versus a sophisticated level, I believe needs to be a little bit clearer than this language in here. And so I told it like, hey, can you reword this a little bit? And it was okay. But then there's like, okay, this required guidance. It's like, okay, so do they need a scaffolded version or can they do the calculations on their own? That helps me have something to point to be like, hey, you needed scaffolding there. Okay, as I was saying, we were getting a little bit closer with some specific criteria included at different levels for these different skills. It was getting a little bit closer. They kept on wanting to add in a couple other categories, so I had to say, hey, give me just the three categories that I'm really focusing on right now. And it did a pretty good job, but then I was trying to think like, okay, let's say that they've done some calculations. What should they do next? And that was stuff that I wanted to incorporate into my conclusion elements here, where it's like, okay, this isn't really like a CER argument, so we're not going into like the practices 6, 7, and 8. But we do want to do some sort of communication of our findings and interpretation of the results. That seems totally fair. So it's like, what does that really mean? And I went into a little bit of a conversation to just help me understand also this calculation piece in practice 5 and 4 and how it's a little bit different. And what it thinks I should include into a conclusion. So you can kind of see that I ended up incorporating some elements of what it's talking about in here in this rubric. Also, something that was kind of interesting was sources of error. I wanted to find out if that was really kind of more discussed in the data analysis or this mathematical thinking. And according to chat, and I kind of agree with it, that would be more of data analysis, trying to kind of like figure out analyzing the data, get into groups. I think that looking at what happened to that, analyzing that is definitely falling under that category a little bit more. So I did more sources of error in the other rubric, but if you look in this one, there's something about errors, but it's not like a source of error. It's like an error in the calculation. So it's similar, but a little bit different. I found that, talking about that, while it to me does seem like mathematical thinking, it does fall more underneath the analyzing category. So to assess mathematical thinking, what we really need to do is get students doing calculations. Usually that's given like from numbers in a data set, like a table. It could be from a figure, but we're not really like analyzing the figure. We're actually having to do like some sort of average calculation or a statistical concept, maybe probability, or something like that. So the students should know what tools may be relevant. I think that having like a nice little menu of tools is a nice option. You could just let them figure out what tools to use, but especially for younger students, I would tell them like, hey, you might want to use a calculator or Google Sheets or something like that for this, and then let them pick from those tools. And then they should be able to tell you what the steps are in the calculation and actually perform them. So they should have some sort of work section where it's clear what the steps are and how they did it, and like all the parts are clearly labeled with units, labels that are appropriate, all that stuff. And then ultimately those results also need to be used, so there needs to be a little bit of like written explanation, or honestly oral explanation about what the next steps would be. So you could support ELL students by having it not be a written form, but there definitely needs to be some sort of piece here with the mathematical thinking where they're explaining what's going on. They can't just do the math, they have to be able to explain it, right? So then if we look at the actual rubric, this is what I've got. You can kind of see I've talked about a little bit in some previous parts of the video. I really, really like these categories as well as the criteria in there. It makes it clear with this 3, 2, 1 that the 3 is actually like very, very good. 2 is pretty good. 1 is kind of weak, and 0 is absent. So you can get an idea of like, okay, well, they're never going to get a 0 for stuff that was done wrong. If they've done anything, they should be getting a 1. Most students should be able to get a 2. 3 is going to be tricky, but definitely achievable for everyone with enough time with feedback. Yeah, that's the main idea. There's the 4 categories, the application of the math. So that's like them actually doing the math correctly. So that's why errors would lose points there. There's using the computational tool. Maybe they used the right tool, but maybe they didn't tell you what tool was mentioned. So they should be telling you what, if they're using a calculator, that calculator that was being used, right? And then there should be some sort of clear documentation. If they're doing work in calculators, they should be at least like writing out the formula with the numbers lined out where they would be. They may not need to do like the long form like division or whatever, but they should say what is being divided by what. so that you can know what was plugged into the calculator and what you got out. Um, and then ultimately they need to do that written explanation where they're telling you how what we saw relates to our question and possibly follow-up experiments that we could do. We have one NGSS performance expectation here that actually has our practice in it. I'm going to show you this assessment, which you can buy from Teachers Pay Teachers. I'll have a link in the description of this video. But you can also have this rubric easily imported into Google Classroom with the Google Sheets. I go over that in my CER as well as modeling videos. There's like a section kind of near the end of the video where I show how to do that. And it's the same thing here. If you've got this table, you can put it into a Google Classroom pretty easily and it's very efficient. That's what I'd recommend for grading these. But if we look at the actual standard here that we have, this is the practice using mathematical computational thinking, and we have some content as well as the evidence statements here, so they give a little bit more clarity as to what you should be observing and looking for in this section of the course. I disagree with this a little bit because it does a little too much of a focus on the analysis and the argumentation. They do have some stuff here around the trends and averages being related, so they are stating what the math is and how that relates to our phenomenon. So that's definitely related to what we had in the application of math and actually using this stuff and relating it to the question. So that we've got, I think it's relates back to question. That's kind of in this piece right here. So there's definitely some similarities. There's also a pretty big difference. I kind of disagree with whoever wrote the observable traits for this particular PE, but that's honestly because SEP 4 and 5 have a lot of overlap. But if you're going with how I'm thinking about it, this is kind of what I was thinking of giving students is like, here's a data table with some sort of question asking very simply, big picture kind of question, did the population go through natural selection? And here's a data table. Then they have to do some sort of calculation where they tell you what tools they're working and then inserting either a picture of their work using their computer's camera or like they can use their phone camera and then attach it in here. There's a number of ways to do that. But then you can also have like Google Sheets directly linked in here, or if they're doing work digitally, they can maybe copy paste that from their digital notebook straight on here. A number of things that they can do to show their work. So there should be some sort of documentation of the work that you can then see and see if it was done correctly. Now the analysis piece is not really being assessed directly with my rubric here, though it is kind of coming into play with summarizing and relating it to the question. So I would expect students to still do some sort of analysis because that would be useful in relating our data to the question. So to kind of like answer right here, which should also probably say respond here in red, like how I have been doing above. But there should be basically these three things, which is related to our rubric directly right here. So a couple questions, just a reminder of what to include with calculations, and then the data table and the question. And I think that that's all that they really need. You could do more with the whole lab report. You could also have them apply this, but it just gets a little unwieldy at a certain point to do within a 2-week window for a particular standard. So yeah, I think that that's that. Let me know if you've got any questions. I also do teacher PD. Feel free to email me at mclearn@gmail. Yeah, thank you. I'll see you around. Thank you for McLearning with me. Before you go, please check out the following services that I offer with my business. So if you click the link in my videos, this goes to my website. I might be changing it from Podia because I'm no longer doing the interactive videos for sale. I might put those up for free. But most of my other services are linked here. So you can see that I've got like a Teachers Pay Teachers and a Wyzant. The Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of my assessments that I have for like the NGSS, as well as lessons that I made when I was actually a teacher in the classroom. So I've got quite a few things like CERs and other things on there. If you want to get one-on-one live support from me, either like with science or like working on like teaching support lessons and that kind of stuff, you can sign up through Wyzant. I have a link to there where you can contact me there. And we can schedule hourly appointments. And I've got a few other things on here like a Facebook page and other social media. And if you're interested in getting professional development with me for like a team of teachers, a whole page with information on that. So yeah, feel free to check that out. Thank you.